Welcome everybody to Mapping Your Future, What Can You Do with a BA in the Humanities, and we're really excited to see such a good turnout here. I, along with my e-board members throughout the room, belong to the Humanities Ambassadors, and we kind of have this vision that there's kind of a problem with the humanities in the undergraduate community today. Not the humanities itself, but with the way that maybe the humanities is envisioned throughout. And what we've seen tends to happen is sometimes people outside of humanities majors feel they don't have time to do anything humanities related outside of class. Or maybe even if you are a humanities major, maybe you feel like there's a stigma against you. Maybe people will start asking you, what are you going to do with that degree? Or do you really need that? Maybe you should do something like a mathematics degree. And it can be a little frustrating. So we founded this club with the idea that we want to talk about ways, which we're going to do tonight, that you can definitely get involved with the humanities after your undergraduate career. So that's what we wanted to do, and we also just want this to be a way to celebrate, because some of our panelists, while they majored in the humanities, they might not do something directly involved with the humanities today, but it still colors their backgrounds and how they perform in their careers. So with that, we're going to get started. Just a quick reiteration of how we're going to run this. For the first maybe half of the program, I will introduce each of our lovely panelists. They will give about a 5-minute talk about themselves, just tell you who they are, how they got into the humanities, a bit about what they do. And after that, we're going to have a break, and it will be your job to choose the table of whichever panelist you're interested in speaking to. We will have 3 15-minute sessions. We're going to be really strict about time. And basically, once you're at a table of a panelist that you're interested in, you're welcome to ask them whatever you like. They're there to talk to you. They're there to hear your questions. They can facilitate discussion, but they'd also love to hear what you have to say, most of all. And we also ask, I know it's a bit crowded, but please fill every seat once the breakout sessions start. We don't want crowding at one table and then another table's empty. So, but that said, we know that there are still not enough seats. So once all the seats are full, we understand if people have to stand. So with that, we're going to get started, and thank you so much for coming out tonight.
As the program assistant at the Whiting Foundation, I kind of have 2 directions that my work goes in. I assist in running an award for literature. So I work with writers in fiction, nonfiction, poetry, and plays, and do a various number of administrative things about running the award, which is great because it allows me to interface with a lot of people who are creative thinkers, who are writing or thinking about writing, and that's been a really wonderful aspect of my work so far. And then on the humanities side, I really do get to think about questions of the humanities and how they're applicable, and how experiences of undergrads can be made better, or how we can make connections about the relevance of the humanities in the real world and in the job world, because we focus on a lot of programming in terms of grant making that might strengthen a sense that the humanities are valuable, that the content and the skills and the knowledge of the humanities is really widely applicable, and that you might find it places outside of what you might traditionally think about doing as a humanities career. I am very squarely in the humanities, but there are a lot of things that you could be doing that may seem a little bit more high-tech, or might have a little bit more cachet right now, that also involve a lot of humanities thinking. So I look forward to talking to you a little bit more about my current work, and also any other questions you might have about kind of the first steps that you make.
I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of how I came to this path and ended up involved with so many universities. I went to undergraduate university at John Cabot in Rome, Italy, which was a great opportunity for myself. I actually double majored in humanistic studies, so you can't get more humanities than that, and as well as in international affairs. And so even kind of going out of undergraduate, I was making a choice of whether to pursue a humanities career or whether to go a different route and maybe work in the State Department or something like that. And I decided to go the humanities route because, first of all, I felt like if I didn't try, I would regret it. And that's where my passion really lied. And also because I figured if I went the international affairs route, I'd end up being really depressed all the time. And so that's kind of what that initial choice I made. And so that choice led me to apply to master's programs in medieval studies with the intention of going on and being a professor in history, focusing in medieval studies. And that's how I ended up at Fordham University and why I'm in New York. So I was doing that, and then I realized that maybe that wasn't really the path I wanted to take. So you'll see this with a lot of people who kind of end up in careers that they started at a graduate program, and maybe they decided that that's not what they wanted to actually do. And that's okay. And going into that program, I would have never thought it was okay. So I just want to put that out there to begin with. So I was working in this program for medieval studies, and then I ended up doing some administrative assistant work in the Center for Medieval Studies at Fordham, which gave me some great experience in event planning and especially conference planning and working with faculty in working on their syllabi a little bit and working with graduate and undergraduate students as they put together events and tried to go through their programs. So that led me to think I still wanted to be involved in a university setting, be involved in a humanities context, but just not in a professorial position, which led me to go to the library program at Rutgers University, and I've been really enjoying that program. It's allowed me to think about how libraries and information seeking really fit in with the humanities questions and the humanities endeavors, whether it be research or teaching or just learning more generally. So that program kind of made me think about working in maybe special collections. So if anybody has questions about libraries and special collections or archives even a little bit, or working in the reference part where you interface with humanities departments and the library together, that's something I'd be happy to talk about. But what's happened is I seized the opportunity to learn more about this digital humanities thing, and I'm sure you've heard some things about it. There's things going on at NYU and at many places across New York. I've actually attended an event about digital humanities hosted by the Humanities Initiative here. So there's a lot going on, and there are a lot of job opportunities that are coming up through taking digital humanities and incorporating some of these new methods and tools into how students learn, how people learn, how research is done, how writing is done, and then how we can communicate that to the larger world. And that can lead to careers both in a university context, in an education context, or even in the startup world and in other kind of places where they're looking for people to think with a humanistic and liberal arts mindset. So I apologize if I got a little long, but I'd be happy to answer questions that anybody has on any of those topics.
So I'll basically just talk about two quick things in relation to how I came to the humanities and what it means more generally. The first thing I want to talk about, and both relate to this idea that we have these days of the humanities being in crisis, right? And there are all these other sciences and the other academic disciplines that are perhaps not in crisis, and it's the soft sciences that tend to be thought of in crisis. So I want to say two things that kind of dispute this idea of crisis. First is to say that it looks very different, firstly, if you think of the humanities not just in the perspective of the US, but more globally. And if there is this perception of the humanities receding from public interest, this is not true outside the US at all. So I was trained in English literature at a college in India called St. Stephen's College. And interestingly enough, if one looks back at the history of the humanities teaches you what it is to learn more about the humanities itself. It's a college where the discipline of English literature was invented for the first time. And that's the subject I did. The humanities was invented to teach the colonial subject more about what the metropole was. And then they realized it was a really good idea and they brought it back into the metropole. Then the humanities recede a little bit from a lot of colonies that decolonize, and engineering, science. These become big imperatives to kind of develop and catch up with the rest of the world. I think now we're in a very different moment when places like India, China, and elsewhere, the humanities are really coming back into focus, and about 17 to 20 universities have opened in India itself over the last 5 years that want to focus on a liberal arts and humanities education. So as soon as you think of it kind of outside just the US, there are going to be students coming in, students going out, there are careers that are opening up all over the world, and that's something worth thinking about. The second thing I'd quickly like to talk about is I don't think we're in crisis at all, and that's a kind of different way of putting it. My particular interest in studying the humanities is to think of it in relation to the sciences, and in my own work, I track the idea and the concept of pain as it emerges as a biomedical specialty and object of intervention in India. And as soon as one starts looking at any kind of on-the-ground practical scientific work, humanities researchers, scholars, people with some kind of humanities training become extremely important. So I was working alongside a team of doctors trying to develop cancer care and pain interventions for the urban poor in India. And as soon as they start working on pain, they realize there's been a lot of thinking around pain in the humanities. And that pain itself, and alongside many other biological scientific conditions, is not purely a biological thing. You need to bring in ideas about spirituality, about social conditions, about political economy, to understand how even to begin to approach something like the therapeutics of pain. So there's always been this idea that the humanities and the sciences aren't very well aligned. It's been a popular idea, but it's never really been true in practice, I would suggest. And it's always been something that scientists and the humanities disciplines have worked very well alongside each other in. And it's something that's really catching on in the last 10 years. You'll see new disciplines emerging, neuroaesthetics, genetics research alongside humanities scholarship, neurophilosophy, things that try to look at the human condition across these interdisciplinary arrangements. And it's something that we are really being asked to contribute expertise towards. And there's more I could say about this. There's ways in which we shouldn't, and there are ways in which we should, but we can leave that for later. But just to say that these are points of intersection that keep us very relevant in a way that perhaps we have never really been in crisis. And the last thing, I'm a fellow at the Humanities Initiative right now. It's a great place outside your disciplines to begin to think of the humanities a little more in general at NYU. 20 Cooper Square, the events almost every week. It's a good place to start thinking about what it looks like outside just what your discipline thinks about it.
Thanks so much. I know that these conversations and careers and choosing majors and thinking about what your major is going to end up as looking like as a way of life can be kind of anxiety provoking. And my main message, I guess, is that you can't escape your destiny. You can change your major, you can think about a different career, but you're going to end up doing what you were meant to do anyway. And I think it's a very strange kind of story that I have to tell. In high school, everybody thought I was going to be an engineer. Everybody said, "Oh, you're so good at math." I got really great SAT scores in math. I went into an undergraduate program with the intention of either being somebody in computer science or being somebody in engineering. And I did great first year. And there's something wrong, though. And I had a couple of teachers that were kind of mean, and the classes were 8 o'clock in the morning, and I was 19, and I fell in love, and all these things, right? So I ended up reconsidering what all this investment I had put into the sciences, and just said, as like an impetuous 19-year-old will do sometimes, I'm not doing it anymore, right? I have other things that I can do. And I was very interested in journalism. I was very interested in literature. I had a really great literary theory professor who taught a general college elective, and it really made me change my mind, right? And I said, forget it. I'm turning my back on the sciences, and I'm going going to get a BA in English, which I did. I worked on the student newspaper. This was a while ago. I hate to say how long it was, but they were just starting to use desktop publishing back then. And so I was, learned how to use computers because I was supposed to be an engineer, and I was really good at networking and graphic design. Had all these bizarre kind of skills that I got that weren't really even related to my major. Also got a good foundation in literature, and moved to New York, and couldn't finance my master's degree the way I wanted to do. I wanted to go for a master's in American Studies. It was kind of a difficult time. Ended up getting a job in desktop publishing, which led finally into a job at a management consulting firm where I was an editor, making presentations and fixing people's commas and making sure that they didn't have inappropriate uses of colons and stuff like that, and talking to the partners about Shakespeare. Right, it was a very strange time. But at the same time, I was working on my master's degree, and then eventually went on for the PhD. And I was very interested in the way in which literature serves as this evidence of the history of science and history of technology. When you're a author, or when you're somebody engaged in the world, you don't just say, "Oh, I'm a literature person." You're dealing with contemporary issues, and of course, literature has this residue of what people were thinking about science and technology. And because of my interest in science and technology, it was very easy for me to bring this out and to write about it, and I became very fluent in the ways in which science and literature work together. I started teaching at Polytechnic, which has a lot of engineering students who don't even know what the humanities are. So, as you're saying, some countries don't even have this tradition in the humanities. It is kind of a rather new thing. And so the idea that you have to come to college and take a humanities class is bewildering to people who are thinking more of a professional education. And so that led me into thinking about how the humanities is relevant in the science and engineering fields, thinking about how literature or culture in general can help sponsor innovation in the sciences, or thinking about ethics and engineering. And it's been a really nice, I think, productive exchange between me and the engineering faculty and the students. So one of the things that I'd like to say, I guess, is that one of the great things about the humanities majors is that they are very flexible. If I were to do it again, I definitely wouldn't have just turned my back on the sciences and engineering. I would have tried to bring them together, because certainly I ended up doing that in my career anyway. And so one of the nice things you can do with these degrees is make your own, kind of create your own path. Because of that experience, led me with a group of other faculty in my department to create these majors in science and technology studies and sustainable urban environments, which allow people to combine their interests in science and engineering with interest in the humanities or the social sciences. And it's been very nice for me to work with students who have an interest in literature or other fields of the humanities, but also have professional goals. And so some people want to go on to be physicists, which is nice, but they also want to study the history of physics. Some people have professional goals. They want to go on to law school, or they want to go on to med school. They don't want to look like all of the other political science majors or all the other biology majors. When they make their applications, they want to have something different. They want to know a little bit more about the world. They want to know a little bit more about the interaction between health and culture, or health and psychology, and that kind of thing is something that you can do with the humanities major, which you probably can't do in some of these more structured majors in the sciences. So at the end of the day, I sit around at the lunch table with engineers. I work on the digital humanities, working with computers. I have a computer science graduate student. I met with him today. We're working on a project. We're arguing about databases in PHP. And I read books, right? And so it ends up that I wasn't able to escape my destiny. I tried to change my major, ended up doing pretty much everything that I intended.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really great to talk to you all. So as Shana said, I right now work as a manager for design and technology at Kickstarter, which hopefully most of you know about. Hopefully some of you have done projects even. So Kickstarter is obviously this sort of platform for creative idea sharing and creative funding, and that extends to what we think of as more traditional kind of creative fields like literature, so people can publish books, art, music, filmmaking, but also the categories I work with are design and technology, which again are perhaps somewhat outside of what we would normally consider to be traditional creative fields, but we view them very much that way, that writing software or creating a new piece of consumer electronics is very much a creative act, and that's sort of a perspective that I bring to the work I do there in working with the range of creators that are submitting projects. Kickstarter is based in Greenpoint in an old pencil factory, and down the street I have my own studio where I have my own creative practice. So as Shane mentioned, I do kind of sound installation work, mostly involving musical robotics, so designing acoustic instruments that play automatically and kind of can be programmed by computers to create these immersive experiences that in simple terms, sort of I'm trying to flip the experience of the kind of audience and performers so that you're actually surrounded by all the sounds that you're hearing creating this song. And I've been doing that work for a number of years, and it's sort of I liked what Chris was saying about you can't avoid your destiny. When I was an undergrad, I studied English and studio art, but I was always in my sculpture classes working with sound and doing sound installations. In all of my English classes, I was always trying to find excuses for writing about the history of radio or kind of creative uses of sound. So I definitely feel like I wound up where I needed to be with that. And it also sort of connects to the work I previously did at StoryCorps, which, if you're not familiar, it's an oral history project that has publicly accessible recording booths. And you basically can bring in your grandmother or your best friend or just somebody you admire and interview them for an hour. And then that recording goes to you, but also goes to the Library of Congress. And then we produce radio pieces of that. And so I had the opportunity to, again, sort of use the sort of technical abilities I developed around sound and doing all these humanities courses to apply it to a larger idea. And the work I did there was both recording interviews and then later managing the archive and sort of running the technical side of their operations. And looking at what has been a very kind of pleasantly confusing and diverse career for me, I think the things that sort of stitch all the things I've been involved in together are, for one thing, just being involved with creative communities. I realized early on, and in part in college, that was something I really loved, being around other people who are making art, who are doing projects, and that's something that I'm still involved with as well, teaching at the ITP program. If you're not familiar, it's just around the corner. You should really check it out. It's really almost a perfect example for this idea of bridging the perceived gap between kind of technology and the humanities. Because ITP is a program that's explicitly to kind of combine creativity and technology. And it's in some ways an engineering program for poets, artists, designers. So teaching people how to program, to work with microcontrollers, robotics, but not assuming that they're coming from a technical background, assuming that they're here because they have ideas that they want to realize and they have projects they want to create. And that's really what it does. So I teach a course there right now that is based on using robotics for creative purposes and kind of delving into the history of automated devices as they relate to creative expression. And then the other kind of big thread that I've sort of noticed in my interest in the things that was a passion for me are these being involved with platforms for sharing ideas. So both at StoryCorps and at Kickstarter, really what I feel like, more than anything, more than the specifics of what those projects are doing, it's about creating a tool that's accessible to the public and letting people come and say, I have this idea and I want to share it, and creating a very inviting, dignified, and exciting way for it to put it out there and kind of find a community of people who are also excited about that. And I think my training in the humanities and the work that I did in literature and art prepared me well for that.
Hi. I'm going to start when I was an undergraduate, which is a while ago, but it's a good place to start. I thought I was going to be a major in philosophy or art or English, but I went to university in a very troubled time when the students were trying to close the university. The Vietnam War was going on. People were afraid the university was going to be blown up. And it wasn't like a good time to reflect. So I ended up a psychology major to try to figure out what was going on. And then when I graduated, there were no jobs, and I became a janitor. And I was a janitor at the same university. I was a student 2 weeks later, and everybody called me sir because I was working class. And then I became a gardener and a security guard and things like that. And eventually I got a job in book publishing on a psychology book series. And the reason I got the job was because all the researchers were all women, because it was the lowest paid job, and they decided they need a few men because otherwise it wouldn't look good, so they hired me and a few other men. So I started as a text researcher, and then I met the guy who wrote the book, and he said the editors didn't allow one complete sentence that he had written to remain in the book. They edited it and changed every sentence. So I switched to become a picture researcher because I thought it was safer than text, because pictures were harder at that point to modify in those ways. So I did that for a while, and then they fired me with 10% of the people because they were, well, that's a long story. So they fired us, and I went on unemployment insurance, which was a very happy time because I didn't have to do things I didn't like to do. So then a while, about a year and a half later, about midnight, I'm walking on Central Park West, and I ran into a friend, and he said, the New York Times Magazine is looking for a picture editor. So I applied, and then they tried me out, and I got the job. I was still in my 20s, and I was in charge of deciding for people, 1.6 million issues every Sunday, what was going on in the world. So I was very happy then that I had been a more or less liberal arts major, you know, and I read a lot, and I thought a lot, and I looked at a lot of stuff. What I did in college, instead of really majoring, was I went to the library, and I started with the letter A, and I read novels. I got up to about Q by the time I graduated. That was my idea of what education should be. So as a picture editor, it was fun because you had to know about skiing and about the war in Bosnia and about the president. And I assigned the photographer, when Reagan was shot, the photographer I had on assignment was covering him when the assassination attempt happened. So you became part of all this news and part of all that stuff. But then I found it to be very formulaic, finally, because you had all these celebrity pictures, and I didn't like doing that. So I left there and then ended up basically working in human rights, because the feeling was that the UN, UNICEF, I worked on the campaign to end polio globally, I worked on the Millennium Development Goals, on many things, and the idea was working with media, you could get it out with websites, you could get it out in all kinds of ways, and they didn't have to, you know, have a press release and have CNN pick it up. So I did all those sorts of things. And then I came to NYU, and at NYU, what I've been doing is really teaching courses on future of media and human rights. And the reason I teach future of media is because I want us to be able to affect it. I don't want it to be a done deal. I want people, you know, you guys, your generation, to be able to do things so that all this media, you all have computers, you all are publishers. In my day, you needed millions of dollars to be a publisher. You don't need it. So the intent is to help people figure out how you could impact the world. I write books on it and so on. But here, about 5 years ago, we started the Photography and Human Rights program, and it's a 6-week program in the summer, and this year we had 600 applicants from non-Western countries for 6 scholarships that we're giving. So we have people from Syria, Bosnia, Iran, China, Brazil, India, and so on, who come and then go back to their countries, Bangladesh, and make images of what's going on and affect the world. You know, the guy who went back to Nairobi from Kenya is trying to start basically the Kenya Spring. There's a lot of corruption in the government. He was jailed 3 times since he took the program, and he's also a senior TED fellow. The woman from Bangladesh took the image that Time magazine said was one of the 10 most important photographs of the year last year, of the couple died after the textile collapse, the factory collapse, in the dirt holding on to each other. So to me, the enormous pleasure, I had no idea, you know, when I was graduating college, that's what I would be doing. But it all, in retrospect, kind of makes sense, because there's, you know, the potentials with media, the potentials with imaging, the potential with the digital, the story isn't written yet. It's wide open. And so the excitement for me is to try to be helpful in writing that story so it goes in interesting directions. I don't want to just regurgitate and do stuff that already happened. I want to see, you know, where things are going. And part of what I do also is I curate exhibitions in Korea this year, in Uruguay, and Poland, and different places, using new media, old media, and trying to get at different sorts of issues. So that's kind of the nonlinear narrative of what that was.
And so basically we're going to have 3 15-minute sessions where you get to speak to the speaker of your choice, ask them questions about the future of the humanities, about something they said, maybe about something in your life, basically whatever you want. If you have any questions, we have e-board members with name tags around the room to direct you. And we look forward to the roundtable breakouts. Thank you guys for speaking.